We're going to be exploring violence, violation, dishonor, and disrespect. So, in order to violate something, you have to have an idea. You have to have language, because that's what's violated. You can think of identity as the violation of an identity. For example, this is a dog. As soon as we say that this is a dog, we have an idea of the system, the pattern of energy that is dog. And we say that the dog has hair, the dog has a nose, the dog has eyes, the dog has paws, and then we say the dog has preferences, as expressed with licking versus squealing or something like that. But we have a very clear sense of this is a dog. And if I was to take a knife and cut off the head of this dog, we would say that this is a violent act because it violates the idea of dog. It no longer is a dog because it no longer has a head. And as a head is considered an essential component to the idea that is dog, we would call it a pretty major violation, an essential violation. So to violate something is to exert force in a way that disrupts and disperses the pattern of energy that is represented by an idea of energy that is formulated in language. And the disruption of that idea is the violation. You have violated this dog. Now, we also have many, many areas of violation. We have the idea of rights. And so, for example, the fact that in our cult, spending $400 purchases the right of ownership for this dog. His name is Philip, by the way, which is another idea. Because if his name is Philip, but we call him Pam, we say this is a disrespect of the actual name. And so there's the idea that dogs should be called by their proper names, the idea of a name, and the idea of Philip as a name. So we have three ideas. So when I say Pam, I'm violating those three ideas. And I'm also violating the integrity, meaning Philip didn't pay much attention to Pam because I don't usually use that tone to mean anything. So we're violating the habit. Whereas if I say his name in a particular way, there is an association with that sound that is such that there's a response to the memory, to the pattern of energy associated with that sound. So all violence is the severing, the violation, the dishonoring of a series of ideas. Because if in the broadest sense we simply say that everything is energy and all energy relates to itself and it is in continual flux and motion, as one energy becomes another energy becomes another energy in different forms, as the form of the energy evolves in a natural progression, then there is no violation. It's very similar to the idea of garbage. Garbage is an idea that human beings have created to represent the reality that there are forms of energy, usually that we create, that we do not know what to do with. And so if we label the word garbage as people who do not know how to relate to the energy they create, then we have a good sense of the phenomena. We create paper bags by cutting down trees and turning the carbon in the trees into pulp, and then wetting the pulp and running, blending it all up and letting it dry so as to create paper. And having created a paper bag to carry groceries home, we no longer need the paper bag. And so we put it in the garbage can for that space which holds that which we don't know what to do with at that point. And it represents us creating forms of energy that we don't know what to do with. But this idea of garbage violates the idea of ecological interconnectedness, of everything is sacred. So the idea of garbage violates the idea that everything is sacred. The idea of waste, energy in formation in a pattern to be disposed of, violates the idea of all energy has a purpose, all energy has meaning. So ideas violate other ideas. But ideas are also part of a system of thinking, feeling, speaking, and doing. Ideas are part of an identity, a cult identity, of which anthropologists have suggested there have been 10,000 cultures in human history. 10,000 cult identities. And each cult identity puts itself in polarity through distinction with every other cult identity. We are the ones who eat this, who sleep in this way, who dress in this way, who have these rights, who utilize mouth noises to make these sounds, and in our case, these sounds mean this and not this, because other cults might use the same sounds but to mean something very different. We are the ones who are like this as distinct from this. That's who we are. We are an identity. Now, all identities exist in polarity, in distinction from other identities. Because if there's no distinction, there's no need to point out that we are this. The need to point out that we are this is only necessary for the purpose of making clear that we are not this. We are Christians. We are not Muslims. We are Buddhists. We are not Christians. We are Muslims. We are not Jesuits. Muslims wear like this, eat like this, think like this, speak like this. Christians wear like this, eat like this, speak like this. We are this, not this. Otherwise, there's no point in pointing it out. We are this and not this. Now, the first violation is the identity. And if you imagine an archetypal energy, a unipolar energy, a unified synergy that encompasses all that is, if you imagine that, then you are not in an identity, you are not in language, you are not in thought. And the reason for that is quite simple, that language, identity, thought, and distinction violates the principle, violates the reality of an interconnected, synergistic totality of everything. Interconnected means you don't break it up into distinctions. Synergistic means that the whole functions in such a way as to be greater than the sum of its parts. Inclusive means that it includes the unknown. It includes the unconscious. It includes everything. Well, identity, distinct identity, violates that pre-emergent form. You have that pre-emergent form, and then you have a separation that says, this is me, and I'm not it. And that's it, and it's not me. I'm separate from the whole. I'm separate from mom. I'm separate from mom and dad. I'm separate from my family. I'm separate from my cult. I'm separate from my species. I'm separate from God, Goddess, all that is. I'm separate from my planet. I'm singular. I'm distinct. This is me, a habit, a pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, and doing that is unique, that is uniquely different from every other identity in the multiverse of probabilities, of possibilities. This is me, distinct from everything else. Once we have the initial violation, the initial distinction, this is me and that's everything else, the identity is formed in the wound. Because when everything is inclusive, when everything is one, there's no wound, because there's no idea of wound, because there's no language that says this is a wound and this is not a wound. There's no language, so there's no distinction. Words exist to differentiate one thing, one person, one idea, one feeling from another. And the sophistication of one's vocabulary equates to the sophistication of the knife with which reality is carved up into the idea, into the ideas of different shapes. We don't actually learn anything about reality through language. What we learn is about our habit of breaking reality into pieces. For example, In one language, we might call this a V, because the language emphasizes the V shape. Let's say that our identity is a mountain tribe. As a mountain tribe, we deify the shape of the V, the valley and the mountain. And so naturally, a hand is not a hand, it's a series of V's. So we have V number 1, we have V number 2, we have V number 3, we have V number 4. There are not 5 fingers, there are 4 V's. We've divided the landscape of ideas, the landscape of energy, according to a set of suppositions that follow our cult, our significance and meaning. That's how we're doing it. 5 fingers, what are you talking about? There are 4 V's. And we start with this one because it's the biggest V. It's number 1, V1, V2, V3, and V4. That's the language within this tribe. Now, it might not call it a V, because who are you to decide which sounds correlate with V's? Isku, iska, isku, iski. It's the obvious way to say it. And anyone who has been habituated to those sounds and shapes knows what that means. And anyone who doesn't, does not. The violation begins when the totality, which is 99.9% unconscious and unknown, which is 99.9% unmapped and unarticulated, is used as a cover, to represent all that is. Because when you take the totality of all that is and you descend into language as the lens through which one views reality, one is viewing less than a percent of a percent of a percent of reality. But one is projecting that small fraction of energy as a representation of reality. We're saying this is reality, a percent of a percent of a percent, and I am distinct from reality, and I am distinct from everything else as a percent of a percent of a percent of my version of reality, my version of language, a percent of a percent of a percent of a percent. This is it. And because it is unique, and because it is spoken of with a certain amount of staticity, it's static. I am white. Well, what happens when I get covered in soot and ash? Well, I'm no longer white, but I'm going to call myself white, just covered in soot and ash, because I don't have a fluid enough identity to deal with I am white except when I'm red from sunburn, except when I'm brown from suntan, except when I'm covered in ash, except when I'm covered in body paint, except when the lights are turned off. That's too much. You see, having descended and separated into this small sliver in which the totality is represented through a language incapable of expressing it, I'm now too lazy to actually describe what's actually happening. It's not daylight, it's dappled daylight over here, it's bright daylight over here, it's daylight covered in cloud. It's just daytime. I'm not going to be bound up by the rigors of even the tiny little bit of reality that I'm aware of through language. Because if one tries to be aware of a single thing without language, one cannot do it. One cannot be aware of a dog without the word dog. Now, in another language, you could call it zvi. And one could be aware of it through the sound zvi to alert you that the pattern we call dog is present. You kind of get a little sense, little ears. Could be a dog, could be a cat. Could be alive, could be inanimate. But we've seen some signs of movement. We've heard reference to dogs, so we believe in the idea of dog. So, in order to violate something, it has to have a defined pattern. We have to have beliefs and ideas that that is the right pattern, and that pattern must be interrupted. This is my hand. No one should touch my hand without my permission, except the authorities, except all this, except when you should be polite and shake hands. No one should touch my hand without my permission. You just touched my hand without my permission. You violated my right to decide who touches my body. What about the air? What about oxygen? Does it violate my right? Did it consult me? What about water? What about rain? Is rain a violation? You see, violation exists as an idea. Violence exists as the idea of violating, which means there must be a pattern of energy formed as an idea that is then violated. This is where all violation emerges from. Now, to disrespect something is to not see it. So, spect is Latin for see. Respect, to repeat sight, to kind of have an updated version. To respect something is to stay current with seeing something. To see and see again. To stay current with seeing. So this is something to be seen. Now, if my eyes are closed, I cannot stay current with the movement of here, particularly if it's not my hand moving. If there's a pencil moving around, I cannot respect the pencil because I'm not current with it. I cannot respect your feelings that you haven't revealed to me and kept me current with. I cannot respect the needs of my partner if I do not know what their needs are. Nor can I respect the needs of my partner if I don't know what they are and if they don't know what they are. So in order to respect something, to stay current, to keep seeing it, to respond to it. I was at a bank machine the other day, and there were two bank machines. The woman wearing a mask at one bank machine. I was wearing a mask. This is during COVID-19. I began walking to the other bank machine. Stop! Stay back! I think I was about 8 feet away at that point. Don't come near me! So she had the idea that both bank machines should be monopolized, and it was a violation. She said, I know you don't care about COVID-19, but I do. You're just going to have to wait, like I did. She was asking me to respect ideas that COVID-19 was dangerous, ideas that being closer than 8 feet was dangerous, ideas that she had the right to monopolize both teller machines, and ideas that her verbal requests were more important than my banking. Now, I did not respect the ideas in the sense I saw the ideas without knowing exactly which ones were bothering her. What I respected was the animation, meaning it doesn't matter if someone is right or if they're wrong. If they're that worked up about something, and I'm not, why not respect? Why not pay attention to her feelings? And let her control both bank ATMs at an 8 feet distance, and let her make up stories about my feelings of COVID and finish her banking. So there's an awareness that she respected, was looking at my physical proximity, but not looking at my rights and not looking at my thoughts and my feelings. And I was looking at her feelings and her words, but not necessarily understanding her thoughts. So there was some degree of respect. And I kept my distance, and she completed her several transactions on the ATM. And 5 minutes later, I moved in to the machine next to where she was, and within a moment, another gentleman without wearing a mask moved in 4 feet away from me and used the machine. But I didn't say stay back, because my respect for the more fearful statements around COVID was lower. Probably lower than it would have been if I'd had an elderly person to go home to. But since I have no elderly person to care for, and the death rate of those who catch it is less than 1/3 of 1%, and almost all of those have some form of pre-existing strain, meaning asthma or something like that, and I don't have that, I'm not really any more worried about it than I am most flus. It feels bad for a couple of weeks. I'm not going to change my entire life to avoid it. I could stay home every time the flu went around, but it's the cost is not something that I'm alarmed by. So he came, then another woman came with a mask. So two different realities. They're respecting my calm. I was respecting the first woman's alarm and her words and gestures. It's like the most animated person I've seen all day. Stop! Don't move! Don't come close! It's like I haven't seen anyone do that in months about anything. So she must surely have strong feelings. And generally, we see violence emerge when one or more identities who have strong feelings are not respected and honored. So to respect is to see and to stay current. To honor is to change one's behavior as a result of what is seen, and current is to change one's behavior as a result of what is seen. To violate something is to disrupt the pattern of an idea. This is my house. What's a house? Well, it's this structure on this square of land. This is my land. What is land? Well, it's these types of atoms doing this and doing that and doing this. And it's yours. Right here, it's not yours, then it's yours. What happens of the water that flows from this land downhill? Is that water yours before it flows on the land? When it flows onto your land, is it yours? Is it yours when it leaves your land? Now, what if you change the water? What if your neighbor changes the water and then it comes onto your land? Is that yours? Is that your concern? What if someone puts arsenic in the water just before it enters your land? Is that your concern? Where's the boundary? Because the thing when you divide the multiverse up into boundaries of language and distinction is you then have to know what those boundaries are. And now that you've defined the boundaries, what they are, is that what they really are? Meaning, does the way language break up reality have anything to do with the organic ripple effect of energy in formation as it changes through one shape and another and migrates from one shape to another? The employer who chews out an employee in a way that elicits feelings of helplessness and then says, I don't want to hear it, get the job done, alters the employee at an identity level, an identity that then migrates from the workplace back at home and statistically is repeated as the parent chews out their child or is less patient with their dog. Now, does the boss have the right to make a parent abuse their dog? The boss might say, that's ridiculous. Of course I don't have the right to make a parent abuse their dog. I don't have the right to hurt that dog because it's not my dog. But by chewing out the employee and inducing helplessness and rage and frustration, I have that effect, but it shouldn't be considered because we break language down this way, and there is no physical connection. Say scientists who make a point of not studying the physiology of feelings. Where are feelings if they are not in the body? So if a feeling is produced in the body, if the employer was to take a cup of hot lead and pour it on top of the person right as they were walking into a room so that the hot lead drops on the floor and sets fire to the room, we would call that might call that irresponsible behavior. You set fire to someone just as they were going into a room, and so you're responsible for burning down the village because you poured fire onto someone as they were running into the village. But because we don't study the physiology of feelings, we don't say that you poured shame onto someone as they were running into the village and set the village afire, set the family afire with shame. And then we like to differentiate the fact that feelings have impact on behavior. That every single behavior in human history has been motivated by a feeling. Feeling of fear, feeling of righteousness, a feeling of enthusiasm, a feeling of pain, a feeling of joy, feeling of curiosity. That the body doesn't move without a feeling, and that the feeling doesn't just emerge out of nowhere. It has physiological components such that an idea creates feelings, and feelings create behavior and changes physiology. And that all things are viral in nature. We may say this is a table and this is a chair, but if you push the table over, it knocks over the chair. You may say this is a house and this is another house, but if this house sets fire, the fire may jump to the other house. Or if this house slides down the hill, it may slide into the other house. Or it may slide into a telephone pole that falls on the other house. Because things are not as isolated as language, the identity of separate language. This is a telephone pole, and that's what it is. It's not a moving topple for one house to communicate force to another house. That's not a telephone pole. It is a pole that communicates information over wires connected by telephones. But it is also, when a house slides down the hill, that which topples over and communicates force to the house that it falls on. It is also that which bursts into flame and creosote. It is also that which on a sunny day smells of creosote. If you're talking about the creosoted wood poles in many phone systems in the United States, as opposed to the concrete poles in other systems and other cults with their different templates for these names. Which brings up another thing. Is a telephone pole a creosoted wood tree with limbs cut off of it? Or is a telephone pole a concrete rectangle? Or is it a triangulated tower with galvanized metal? Which is it? Language creates an idea, creates an identity, but it is never sophisticated enough. There is no language to fully communicate the multidimensionality and the multidimensional relationships between all the things that the language is supposed to reference. I may say that this is a finger as opposed to the fourth V, or half of the fourth V. I may say that. I'd say the finger is the point, but the finger does not communicate all that can be done with a finger. Is the finger that which is dipped in honey? What about the finger dipped in honey, then arsenic and back into honey? Is that still the finger? What if the finger is that which pushes a rock down the mountain that sides a landslide? Is that a finger? Does it have connection? Is the finger connected to my feelings? Is it connected to my ideas? What if other people have a finger with different feelings and different ideas? Is that a finger too? Well, we have an idea that an object is the object that has nothing to do with other things. And so we say, of course, it's a finger. That's a finger of an angry this person. This is a finger of that person, but they're both fingers. But how can they be the same? How can they both be fingers? If this is the finger that was used to topple a rock that caused a landslide, and this was the finger that gave my wife multiple orgasms, and induced an ecstatic state. How can those be fingers? This one caused mayhem and destruction. This did is the fact that they are shaped like a point more important in their significance than the intent through which they were used? So how can this be a finger and this be a finger with no differentiation? Well, language does that. It decides arbitrarily to highlight certain things that show up within the paradigm of the cult. And it decides to ignore certain things that do not. It's a finger because it's been objectified. And because we are an objectifying cult, it has finger as an object defined, but it doesn't have finger as intent defined. It doesn't have finger as feeling defined. It doesn't have feeling as a measurement of lifetime impact defined. It just has finger as an object defined. Because we are an objectifying cult within an object materialistic paradigm. And so all that matters is that which fits noticeably within the paradigm. Let's take this into a more personal sphere for a little bit to look at violence, violation. So, I want to make love to you. Or, if we use the paradigm of lust, I want to have an intense physiological experience with you in which we both hopefully get highly absorbed, called sex. I want to have sex with you. I want to have an intense physiological experience where it feels good to both of our bodies, where we're caught up in the moment, where lots of things move around. It's a workout, it's this, it's that. I want to have sex with you. Well, sex is an idea. It's an idea. Now, by definition, because language is clumsy, what I am envisioning when I say I want to have sex with you is not what you're envisioning when you say you want to have sex with me, or when you say that you don't. It's the first problem with this idea. In my version of sex, you're enjoying it. In your version of sex, you're not. Or in your version of sex, you're enjoying it, but in my version of sex, I'm not. I want to have sex with you, but we've got two different pictures. Now, sex exists as a mental object on two fronts. It has a cult front, which is the summation of every cult inference in the entirety of your lifetime and my lifetime. It has a cult pattern of energy. The word sex has a cult pattern of energy that has to do with everything you've heard in your cult. For example, in the United States, for a young person to have sex with an old person is ugh, ugh. So if you've internalized your cult, you've internalized the fact that to be old is less attractive than to be young as a sexual partner, which is part of a ranking system. So as a cult, you've learned that small breasts generally less attractive than larger breasts. But we've also learned that natural natural large breasts are more attractive than siliconized large breasts, synthetic large breasts. But within the movement or the subset of the cult that is about avoiding wrinkles, because wrinkles are lower rank than no wrinkles, because they betray age. So you've got multiple ways to manage wrinkles, but everyone agrees in a cult that worships youth that wrinkles are inferior to non-wrinkles. But then you have the people that say, oh yes, I don't have any wrinkles because I take better care of my body. And then there are the people that say, well, I don't have any wrinkles because I have a good plastic surgeon. Plastic referring to what is injected into the body. I have a good plastic surgeon, and these people have wrinkles because they have an inferior plastic surgeon. My plastic surgeon does a good job, and yours doesn't. So we have competency ranking within plastic surgery, all sitting on this foundation that says that it is unattractive for a young person to have sex with an old person. It's unattractive, says the cult. Now, different cults have said different things at different times throughout history. Few people would argue that to try and have a baby with an 80-year-old is less advantageous as a nuclear family than, all things being equal, than with a 30-year-old. Of course, there are many subsets of values and awarenesses even there. Someone who has studied parenting their whole life and actually learned what it is to be a good parent by the time they're 60 might provide a 10x improvement in the welfare and well-being of that child than someone who's 20, who comes from a home in which serial abuse patterns, intergenerational abuse patterns, have been established in a persecuted race. If you're African American and you've experienced shame and racism and rage in an emotionally illiterate culture, that racism and violence defaults and moves into the children. The river didn't start with the parents. The river began with the hostility and the cruelty of the cult, with the fear of the cult. But minorities that lack political and military power in sociopathic cults are scapegoated. So in a sociopathic cult, a minority will be scapegoated that does not have political and military power to defend its own. To be sociopathic is to be driven by the reptilian brain. The reptilian brain's program is to attack that which is smaller and weaker than you, and to run from that which is stronger and bigger than you. So a majority, by definition, is bigger than a minority. So one of the things that majority-minority relationships reveal is how much the reptilian brain is in play. And it's an area where the lowest common denominator prevails. Because if you're in a transcendent state, your reptilian brain is pacified, is calmed, It has not been surgically removed. So when you're in a transcendent state and you are repeatedly violated by a large pattern of energy around you, operating from reptilian frequencies, from fight, flight, freeze, and in this case, predate on that which is smaller, you will be reduced and induced into your reptilian brain, out of the transcendent state into the reptilian brain. And that reptilian brain will give you the coded information to run. Run from that which is bigger than you, fight that which is smaller than you. That's reptilian coding. And the reason that we're induced from an empathic or transcendent state into a reptilian state by a reptile is that reptiles are, generally speaking, incapable. Certainly a crocodile, despite all the wolf laying down by the lamb, etc. If you watch a crocodile's behavior when two parents and a 6-year-old boy are going out for a walk, the crocodile attacks the 6-year-old boy because from a sociopathic level, that is an advantageous move because the 6-year-old boy is smaller and more isolated and demonstrating less competence. That's what you want to kill if you're a predator. If you're an empath, the 6-year-old boy is what you want to protect for those very reasons. The crocodile goes for the 6-year-old boy and runs from the parents, or doesn't. But expecting a crocodile to behave like an empath, holding out a bloody hand to a crocodile and saying, please, lick it, clean the wound, help me, I'm in pain. The crocodile takes a bite. The crocodile predates because that's what reptiles do. And we have a reptilian brain. So if one person is behaving like a reptile and one person is behaving like an empath, the reptile will exploit the empath to a point of pain, where the empath shuts down the empathy because it's too painful and starts going into rage and anger and reaction of the reptilian and limbic brain, which then poses a threat to the reptile, which, if the reptile is a sophisticated sociopath, means that the reptile will go find another empath to feed on so that a fight is not necessary. But if the reptile is much larger, maybe the boss, maybe the parent, maybe the teacher, maybe the government, maybe a policeman, if the reptile is much bigger in rank and power within the dynamic, as the empath is reduced into helplessness and rage and enters the reptilian brain and tries to fight the abuse, the violation, the policeman will shoot him or arrest him rather than run. And so now we've reduced both people to the level of the reptile. Fight, flight, and freeze, but I've got the power. I've got the money, I've got the rank, I've got the badge, I've got the size, I've got the gun. And so I've successfully reduced you into a reptilian state where you want to fight, flight, or freeze, but I'm still going to do what I want with you because I've got mass. I've got the law of mass against me, that the larger object knocks the smaller object out of the way. And I'm going to do that because I can, and because it helps me differentiate myself from my own helplessness. For me to bully and dominate you takes me further away from the small part that I'm transferring to you. I feel less small when I bully you than when I don't bully you, or when I'm bullied by somebody else. So I feel better. I feel better, and so I transfer the sociopathic state to you in a rank system where I still win. I still win. So identity is a cult phenomena. It is the aggregate of mixed and confusing messages, in this case about sex, that the cult has created. And in chauvinistic cults, where there are schizophrenic messages between the masculine and the feminine. For example, in Western cult, if you are in the masculine pole, usually a man, and you have multiple sexual experiences, you are worldly. If you're in the feminine pole, usually a woman, and you have lots of one-night stands, you are a slut. So the symmetry is not there in the cult. Because if a man is worldly for having sex, then a woman is worldly. If a man is attractive, as defined by having many sexual partners, then a woman is attractive, in part measured by the number of sexual partners who have been attracted to her. And so you have the cult program. And you can violate or attune with the cult program. There's kind of an interesting mathematics. Every person who has an affair, every man who has an affair with a woman who he's having an affair with. But in this situation, the man is responsible for the affair, not the woman who either refused to study the science, refused to learn enough about their partner to even know that they had an entire family. The woman that went along with the cult protocol that says that work is automatically more important than relationship. And so all you have to do is throw the word work in there, and I have no interest in seeing your work. I have no interest in going to work with you. I have no interest in understanding any of that because it's part of the cult. Work comes before relationship in this cult, and work is boring in this cult, and work is not to be gone into in detail in this cult. It's not romantic in this cult. The idea of what is and isn't romantic is just whatever the cult decides. Oh, that's so unromantic. What's romance? Well, it's not that. How do you know? My cult told me. So you have the layer of cult programming. And the cult says, this is a rape, this is a violation, this is untasteful, this is bad, this is illegal, this is creepy, the cult has a plethora of stereotypical templates to apply to every situation, regardless of how both people feel in those situations. The cult may tell one woman they should be upset that this happened when the woman is elated. As a reality, the cult may tell another woman that she should be grateful that she has such a man who has these cult attributes and these cult attributes, and the fact that she is miserable and wants to commit suicide is a symptom of her inadequacy as a partner, has nothing to do with the fact that such a man or such a woman has this amount of money and this amount, all these wonderful things, according to a cult. So you have the cult dimension of sex. You have the sensation dimension of sex. So when I touch your body, as a parent, as a gynecologist, as a friend, as a lover, as a doctor, when I touch your body like this, your body is happy and excited. When I touch your body like this, as a lover, as a this, as a this, as a this, as a this, your body is not happy. Your body goes into shock. Your body is unattuned to. So there is the respect of the body. The body doesn't lie. It responds when competent attunement takes place. If that competent attunement is done with an intent to bring pleasure and does so, you have respecting the body's pleasure and pain centers. So you have respect for the cult, you have respect for the body, then you have respect for the micro-cult. Now the micro-cult are the unique thoughts of the individual. Sex is for reproduction only. It is sinful to enjoy sex. The cult's blasting away with sex magazines, but the individual has decided, having read this or that book, that they adhere to abstinence except for reproductive purposes. So the cult is pushing that sex is really the only thing important in relationship. But is, of course, much less important than work. The religious doctrine is saying for reproductive purposes only or not. You're a priest, you're a monk, you're whatever. You've adopted that, and your body, regardless of cult and personal programming, knows what's pleasurable and knows what isn't. Feels good after an orgasm. Now your feelings relate to your ideas. If you believe that sex is beneficial solely for reproductive purposes and to enjoy sex is bad, then when you're touched in a certain way and your body feels pleasure, you believe that you are bad. Because that's the logical extension of that identity. I am someone who doesn't enjoy sex because that's the right thing to do. I am enjoying sex though, and that is bad. Therefore, I'm bad. It's perfectly understandable. The thought, I am bad, produces feelings, which in turn produces chemicals in the body of shame, of smallness, etc., that don't feel very good. So now if you touch the body and you simultaneously elicit the feeling of being bad and the feeling of pleasure at the same time, the body has to become schizophrenic. It says, I like the way this feels, but I'm a bad person for feeling that way, which feels bad, so I don't like the way it feels. Whichever prevails will determine whether you feel net good or net bad in that situation. I have an idea that says I should not have sex on a first date. I have an idea that says you cannot really get to know someone until 6 months. I have an idea that says if you have sex, you should get married. I have an idea that you cannot love someone before really getting to know someone, and thus sex on a first date is meaningless or lust-based sex. I have these ideas. Now, my body has other ideas. My body communicates its version of reality. My heart may fall in love, or what is called falling in love, while my mind says it's impossible that that is occurring, while my cult says you're bad for moving quickly into emotional states. While my cult says you are weak because you move quickly. My body says I want it. My mind says I shouldn't. My heart is getting signals from my mind and my body, and my cult, this part says yes, this part says no, this part says this. Part of the challenge with identities that are complex is they don't sync up. The cult identity does not, in an unsophisticated cult, line up with the physical identity. The physical identity does not, in an unsophisticated cult, line up with the mental and emotional identity. And in a relationally illiterate cult, where all the important questions are not asked. What makes you feel deeply loved and supported? What are your biggest pains? What habits are you trying to create? What habits are you trying to avoid? When all the important questions are categorically ignored in favor of shopping tips, football games, movie preferences, a disintegrated violation at some level is innate within the experience, meaning to have sex or not to have sex is an act of violation. Because if you follow your cult and don't have sex when you want to, you're violating the pattern of your desire. If you follow the cult and have sex when you're scared and shut down, because your mother says it's your wedding night and it's your duty and it's your job, you are now in violation. You're violating your body. You're violating your fear. You're not respecting it. You're not honoring. You're violating. And this is, of course, the crisis that we are in as a sexually illiterate, emotionally illiterate, relationally illiterate, culturally illiterate human being, having profound experiences that dissociate the body from the mind, from the heart, from the cult, and dissociate one person's experience mentally, emotionally, and physically and culturally from another person's experience physically, emotionally, mentally, and culturally. Then you have the social layer of the cult, which is a subset of the cult with its views. This is a gold digger. This person is not good for you. This is a distraction from what you should be focusing on. When you have all of that happening all the time at every level, you have a fragmented, violated experience of connection that is innate to the fact that one idea violates the other idea, violates the other idea, violates the other idea. That one pattern of energy must be violated so that these three patterns of energy can be respected, or that three energies and patterns need to be violated so that this one, and which is the one? When you are confused because there are four dissonant patterns in play, in you alone, let alone your partner, how do you honor? How do you respect? How do you avoid violating yourself and your partner through proximity in such a tangled mess? Well, one of the places to look, and it's a patch-up job in a crisis situation, one of the places to look is to what does the person identify with. For example, in the West, in the United States, people identify with their words and with their thoughts more than they identify with their feelings and their sensations. For example, if you kiss a woman and her body explodes into pleasure and passion and a sense of synergy and wonder, but she said, "Don't kiss me," she will enjoy that pleasure and wonder, and then she will disown it. She will say, "That's not me. I am my words. I am my ideas. And my idea says that a good woman, which I am, does not kiss a man like you. That's my idea. I identify with my idea. And my idea says that a good man does not violate the words of a good woman. Therefore, I will dissociate from the identity of pleasure. I will dissociate and disown my desire to connect with you. And I will identify with and associate with you are a bad man who has violated a good woman. Therefore, this is where we get into so much of the confusion. Why do I feel attracted to bad men? Having defined you as a bad man for listening to my body more than listening to my words, because my words were not in alignment with my body. Because my ancient biological programs are not following my cult dogma. I am disintegrated, which means that no matter what you do, you will violate my words or my body. What will you violate? Well, in a Western culture where the primary identity is language, if you violate the language, you will be viewed primarily through the lens of the language, not of the body. In a more tactile, physical country or cult, where the primary identity is with the body, if you listen to me saying, "Please don't," while my body opens up and erupts, if you listen to my words, I will consider you rejecting me at a fundamental level. Why didn't you follow my body? Didn't you feel? Didn't you see the look? Didn't you notice the response? You should have seized the opportunity. Now my body doesn't trust you. You rejected my body. You didn't show command. You didn't take me. There was a little sliver of culture protesting. You didn't seize that moment. Now, in a chauvinistic culture where assertiveness is registered as action and passivity is not registered as collaboration, the responsibility for interpreting this jumble of mixed signals, these jumbles of violating ideas, falls on the assertive partner in the relationship, the one who asks, the one who presses, the one who inserts, the one who reaches out, the one who touches, to make the call. Legally, in a Western cult, the words are the primary lens through which the interaction is viewed. But if we look at the human being in the context of millions of years, the body is far more central to the sense of self than the cultured mind. The body is more fundamental. You cannot have a cultured mind without a body. You can have a passionate body without a cultured mind. One rests on the other. Either way, whenever you divide the self, such that half of the self likes the experience and half of the self doesn't, you create a tug-of-war that takes energy and dilutes the felt experience. And it's important to understand that violation is the violation of ideas, of language, of patterns of energy. And that one idea violates another idea, one paradigm violates another idea. And that identities are not cross-referenced to intelligence. They are cross-referenced to familiarity. Because intelligence is the efficiency with which energy, time, money, and natural resources is transformed into human well-being. A normalcy or cult referencing asks the question, what happened before? What did you do yesterday and the day before that? When someone is influencing you, a country, a culture, an individual, the question is not usually, is the influence constructive? Is the influence intelligent? Does the influence take you in the direction where, statistically speaking, you will consume less energy to have a higher sustainable yield of well-being? The focus is more on, is someone trying to control you? In a cult where the commitment is to not be controlled, the question is not what is the result of the control, but rather how persistent is the control. We can't have so-and-so interfering in the elections. We can't have so-and-so forcing you to have sex. If you didn't have sex before and you didn't have sex before, if you didn't eat bananas before and now you're eating bananas because so-and-so wants you to eat bananas, it violates the idea of sovereignty. The idea of sovereignty. But does it violate the principle of intelligence? If you need more potassium in your body and as a result your health is going up despite sulking as you eat bananas that you wouldn't have eaten if someone didn't badger you to eat them. So what's the violation? Are you the violator that's damaging your body for refusing to give it the potassium that it needs? And the other person is honoring your body's need for potassium? Or is your sovereignty being violated by someone pushing you against your will to eat bananas? And by the way, increasing your health noticeably in the process. What is the violation? Can there be self-violation? Can a cult violate its people? A cult can certainly violate the principle of intelligence by insisting that people spend more energy to reduce their well-being than they would do of their own free will. When a homeless person cannot build an affordable shelter on a 10 by 10 square foot piece of public land and is forced to live in a tent on a sidewalk and or cannot enter their own house because their step is 2 inches too short to their front door, their local building department will not issue an occupancy because for your own good, we have got to see that step change 2 inches, or you cannot live in your own house. Where is the violation? The one is violating the building code. The other is violating the right to live in their own house. Two ideas. And the idea that's being violated is not necessarily the idea that is most correlated to human felt well-being, which violates the underlying drive. Because every human being in the history of humanity has wanted to feel sustainably better and avoid feeling chronically worse. And if this law and this protocol and this cult norm and this person's right ensures that you feel sustainably worse or are in violation of this idea, and this idea, the idea that thou shalt follow the local building codes as determined by law or be imprisoned by your own tax money. It's a right. It's a violation of a building code. It's a right to live, right to live in one's own house. It's a right for taller people to have bigger steps if they want them. That's also being violated by a unified building code. So which is the deeper violation? Which of all of the various violations, understanding that every idea violates another idea, which of all the various violations leads to the most amount of unnecessary suffering? Then we're talking about the deepest violation of all. The innate drive of every human being to create a life that is sustainably better, to grow and become and reach their potential, to be a more beautiful, true, and good person than they were born or their family before them. That drive to become all that we can be, to better our lives. Where is that being violated? Which laws, which governments, which power structures, which gangs, which customs, which norms, which banking practices, which educational protocols violate that deepest of all drive? The drive to become, to move towards, versus and in harmony with the drive to move away from chronic and unnecessary suffering.